All right, welcome again to Introduction to Economics. We're going to have our first online lesson today, and I'm going to give you some instructions to begin with. These online videos are the same as your lecture material, and you should treat them in the same way. So this is the part of your learning where you receive the content. The advantage of doing videos is that you have more freedom. You can watch them at your own pace whenever you want, and they're always available to you. You can always go back to them. You can also pause and rewind if you don't understand anything or if you want to refresh your mind. There are going to be questions in the middle of the video, so this makes it very interactive. So every few minutes you're going to pause and some question is going to pop up and you have to answer it, and you receive immediate feedback. So the questions are useful because they tell you if you need to review the material that you missed, for instance. That's what comes up on Moodle. If you watch it on YouTube, the advantage is that you can enable subtitles. So subtitles are really helpful for your comprehension, but you still need to do the questions on Moodle. Also, you need to take notes, just as you would take notes in a regular lecture. So what you have to do is in every slide, you have to record the slide number. Notice the slide number on the top left corner. First, record the slide number. This helps you for your future reference. And then write a one-sentence summary of that slide. So in your own words, one sentence, the gist of the slide. And in addition to the summary, also jot down a few points. Okay, so I would strongly suggest that you don't simply copy paste everything on the slide because there is not much learning in that. Try to paraphrase it. So write the gist of the slide in your own words. Okay, also listen carefully. If I emphasize or repeat something, you might want to write that down because that's usually a common mistake by students. So the audio, take some notes on the audio also. It's okay to type your notes, but for the graphs, you will have to do them with hand. So it's important to do the graphs and the math part with your hand. And at the end of the lesson, at the end of the class, you will have to show me your notes for participation points. So take good notes, neat notes, and make them complete. Let's go. Every video starts with a question, which is the overarching theme of the lesson. And we'll come back to this at the end of the video. So we're gonna see a question for every video at the beginning and at the end. So today's question is, we're better off as a society if we reduce our carbon emissions. Do you agree or disagree? So what you have to do is you can take any position, that's fine, that's your personal opinion, but then you have to answer 3 questions in support of your position. So what incentives are involved in this event? What is being sacrificed, and what alternatives there are. So what the idea is that you take a few minutes right now, start by recording the slide number and then the statement, and after that state whether you agree or disagree, so that won't be long, and then you have to provide your arguments in the form of answer to these 3 questions. And for each question I would suggest at least 2 points. So give me 2 incentives, 2 sacrifices, and 2 alternatives. Okay, you have to think a little bit, and it's okay. This is the first time you're getting it, so I don't have any high expectations. All I'm expecting you to do is to write something down. At the end of the lesson, once you have learned more about these topics, you'll be in a better position to have a deeper understanding. So it's going to be very rewarding to see your own learning process as your power of analysis develops. So take a few minutes. These are the kinds of questions, by the way, that show up on your test, so take them seriously. Again, you can agree or disagree, that's your opinion, but the important thing is to have a logical argument for it. So take a few minutes, write the slide number, and answer these questions. These should show up in your notes when you show them to me. Opportunity cost is the most important concept in all economics, and this is something that has a lot of use in everyday life. So what is opportunity cost? It's what you sacrifice when you make a choice, what you give up to get something, your next best alternative. It's an opportunity lost. So there are a couple of important concepts here. One of them is sacrifice and one of them is giving up. So when you take your notes, I suggest that you highlight them or underline them because these are important. And let's look at an example to illustrate what it is. So let's say you like to buy a bike, and the bike costs $800. So you start saving money, and once you have $800, you go and buy your bike. The opportunity cost of the bike is something else that you could have bought with your $800. So you have to think about what else could I buy with $800. So for instance, maybe you could upgrade your cell phone or buy a new one. So when you choose to buy the bike, you sacrifice the cell phone. If you chose the cell phone, you would have sacrificed the bike. So one is the opportunity cost of the other. One is what you give up in order to get the other. All right. This idea of opportunity cost was first discussed by Austrian economist Friedrich von Wieser. So you can see it goes back more than a century ago. So pause here, record the slide number first, write a one-sentence summary of this slide. It would be very short for this slide, and then maybe a couple of important notes of your own, and make sure you paraphrase. Let's look at another example. The Champlain Bridge cost the government over $4 billion. What was the opportunity cost of this project? Now, if you remember, the bridge was a mess, and you can see the picture there. So I'm happy that they fixed it. So the question is, what is the opportunity cost of this project? Now, the immediate answer that students would usually say is, oh, it's $4 billion. But that's not the answer. Opportunity cost is about the hidden cost. So this is important. You might want to write it down. The dollar value is not the opportunity cost. You must think about what else the government could do with those $4 billion. So what are the other options of the government? So for instance, think of other projects, maybe building a hospital, or maybe spending that to reduce student fees. That could be an opportunity cost. Okay, so pause here, record the slide number. Now for the notes here, what I would say is write an example of your own. So I already gave you two examples. There was the bike versus cell phone, and the other example was the Champlain Bridge versus hospital or student fees. Now write an example of your own for opportunity cost before moving on. Okay, there are more costs to doing something than the price that you pay for it. That's the lesson of opportunity cost. You have to think about what you have to give up instead. So other possibilities. There is always an opportunity cost as long as we have two conditions. First, limited resources, and second, more than one option. And the fact is, we almost always have these two conditions, right? So because of that, there is almost always opportunity cost. So I'm emphasizing that always because it has so many applications. In terms of limited resource, the best example of that is time. All of us have time, and our time is limited. So if you want to think about the applications of opportunity cost, the best application is at every moment, literally every moment, you're sacrificing something, because you have to think about what you do about your time. So whatever you do with your time, you're sacrificing other things. So every moment is an application of opportunity cost. So you might want to write that down, the idea of time being applicable here. So whenever you choose anything, you also lose something. And economics is about learning about these trade-offs and trying to choose the best alternative. Okay, so that's the point of economics, and that's why it's so empowering. We are trying to be optimal in our lives. So record the slide number first, and then write a one-sentence summary of this slide. If you need to rewatch it, and then maybe write down a couple of points like the two conditions there, and whatever you understood. Try to use your own words. That helps your learning. This is a new concept, so when you take your notes, write a new heading, production possibilities. It is an application of opportunity cost. So this is about the choices of output that we have given our inputs. Just a reminder, inputs are the same as resources and the same as factors of production. Those three are synonymous. So if you remember, we had four main resources, and one of the main ones that we talked about was labor, workers. And outputs are the same as products or goods and services. Okay, so inputs are the beginning of the production process. Inputs are what goes in to the production. Output is what comes out. It's the end. So inputs and outputs are the two extreme ends of the production process. All right, so let's look at an example. Let's say you have $10 per week to spend on coffee. That's your allowance. That's your budget for coffee. And you have two choices. You can buy either coffee or donuts. And coffee costs $2 per cup, and donut is $1 each. Okay, so you have to decide about what your possibilities are. So let's look at one case where you only buy coffee. If you spend your $10 on coffee, how many cups of coffee can you buy? If coffee is $2 and you have $10, how many cups of coffee can you buy per week if you spend your money only on coffee? Well, 10 over 2, that would be 5. Now, if you're spending all your money on coffee, how many donuts are you getting? Well, you're not getting anything because all your money is gone into coffee, right? So the question here is, how can you have a donut? How would you have a donut if you have only $10? The only way you can have donut is if you reduce your coffee consumption. You need to sacrifice, right? So let's say you lower your coffee consumption and you say instead of 5 coffee per week, you get 4 cups per week, right? So if you get 4 cups of coffee, that's going to free up some money for you. So that's going to free up $2 because one coffee is $2. And with $2, how many donuts can you buy? Well, 2. So another possibility that you have is you can go for 4 coffees and 2 donuts, right? Now notice here what's happening. You're getting more donut and less coffee, right? More of one thing, less of another thing. So that's called trade-off. What was another name for trade-off? Special concept, opportunity cost. So trade-off is the same as opportunity cost. And here we see a very good example of it. All of you always have some budget to spend, and you're always choosing between your options. So that is a good application of opportunity cost. Now, how can you have even more donut? If you want to have more donut, you still have to sacrifice more coffee, right? So another possibility that you have is you can get 3 cups of coffee and you have to calculate the donut. So I'm going to let you fill in the rest. It's easy to do it. Intentionally, when I give you your notes, I leave some parts blank so that you fill it up. And they're always easy to follow. If you're not sure, you can always come up to me and ask me, but I want you guys to be a little bit more engaged in your note taking. So make sure when you take your notes, you have those possibilities in your notes with the correct numbers. If you spend all of your money on donuts, $10 over donuts of $1, then you can get 10 donuts, and in that case you will have no coffee, right? So that's what happens. Now here's one question. If you're getting 10 donuts, can you have even one more donut? If you have only $10, the maximum amount of donuts that you can have is 10. You cannot have any more. You have reached your maximum. And the maximum number of coffee that you can have is 5, right? So these are your limits. So these possibilities are the limits that you have based on your budget, all right? So pause here, record the slide number, write a 1-sentence summary of this slide. You have to think about it, and then write some notes on it, your own notes. I would suggest that you write these equations at the top because these are useful, and also write the numbers, the kind of table of numbers that we have before we proceed. Let's do some fun stuff. We are going to make a table of the numbers that we had. So copy a table exactly as you see in this slide. So 7 by 4 with the proper labels. So we're going to look at 6 points, and we're going to look at the combinations of donut and coffee. So the first point that we have was 0 and 5. So that was when you're spending all of your money on coffee, you get no donuts. And then you had further numbers all the way down to the point where you spend all of your money on donuts and you get no coffee. Okay, so you should have the numbers already. Just make them into a neat table. There is another column which is empty, and keep it blank. So keep some room for yourself. We're going to fill it up later. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a graph. And notice that whenever you have a graph, you need to label everything. So you have to label your axes. In this case, we have 2 options. So these are the 2 products that we have, coffee and donut. So you label them. And in this case, because we have numbers, use a ruler. So make it very nice and neat. If you have graph paper, you can use graph paper. If you don't, that's fine. Just use a ruler and label everything as you see. So what we're going to do is we're going to plot the points. So look at point A. Point A is when donut is 0. Notice that we are at 0 and the coffee is at 5, right? So point A is going to appear right there. Okay. Point B is when donut is at 2 and coffee is at 4. Point C is when donut is 4 and coffee is 3. Then you get 6 and 2, 8 and 1, and 10 and 0. So we see how you can convert a table into a graph. Very simple. Just put the points, and all you do is you draw a line to connect them. In this case, it's going to be linear. It's going to be a straight line. And the name of this line is the PPC. So you can see it stands for Production Possibilities Curve. Note that the word curve refers to not just curvy things, but it also refers to straight lines. It's a general term. Okay, so that's the Production Possibilities Curve for you. That's your budget for the 2 products. So pause here, you don't need to write a summary, but you need to copy the table and the graph and do a very neat job and start by recording the slide number. The production possibilities curve is a graph showing all combinations of goods and services that can be produced given two things. One is all resources are fully employed, and the other is a constant level of technology. So two important concepts here is resources and technology. These are taken to be fixed for any given production possibilities curve. And if you remember, the G/S stands for goods and services. Okay, there are two other names for it, PPB and PPF. The B stands for boundary, the F stands for frontier. So in some other books or some other teachers use PPB or PPF. If you see that, don't freak out. It's the same thing. Okay, so there are three names for it, PPC, PPB, PPF. All right, in the example that we did, we had constant opportunity cost. Why? Because for every additional coffee, we have to sacrifice the same amount of donut. Every extra coffee costs the same units of donut. All right, so because it was always the same, that's called constant opportunity cost. Later on, we're going to see another type of opportunity cost, but for now, let's go to our table and fill in the last column, and it's going to be called opportunity cost. Duh. So now opportunity cost, if you remember, is when you make a transition. It's whatever you sacrifice, right? So for the first one, we're going to block it out because it's not applicable. It's only applicable when you make a transition, when you make a move. So let's look at the first move from A to B. Notice that at point A, you don't have any donuts and you have 5 coffee, right? So when you move from A to B, the question is, what do you gain and what do you lose? So if you look at your donuts, you're gaining 2 donuts and you're sacrificing 1 coffee, right? So the sacrifice is 1 coffee. Okay, so it's important that you write the word coffee down. Opportunity cost is both how much you sacrifice and what you sacrifice. So I want to emphasize that don't include the number only, but also write the units of it. So in this case, it's coffee. Look at the next transition. If you move from B to C, look at what is our gain and what is our sacrifice. So our donut moves from 2 to 4. So the difference is 2. We're gaining 2 donuts. And what are we losing? Again, we are losing 1 coffee. So that's our opportunity cost. Okay, and you can do the same thing for the rest of the table. So if you look for the next jump, we also have 1 coffee that is being sacrificed and all the way to the end. And this kind of this is an approval of the constant opportunity cost idea. So pause here, record this slide number, write a 1-sentence summary of the point that you understood from this, and also complete your table. This is an important slide. You might need to rewatch it later. Let's look at another example where your resource is 15 hours of time that you have. This is what you have to either study or work out. So those are your 2 options. Now you have to ask yourself, what happens if you work out? Well, if you work out, you get a 6-pack, right? Now, is there a catch? Is there a sacrifice? Well, if you're working out, it means you have less time to study, which means your grade is going to go down, right? So the 2 options that we're talking about are grade and fitness. So those are the 2 outputs that come out of studying or working out, and that's going to be your choice, right? So we're going to have another graph, this time without any numbers. Just think about the logic of it. If you spend all of your time studying, what kind of grade do you get? You're going to get a fairly high grade, like A, right? So up there on the grade, but your fitness is 0. You don't get any fitness, right? Now, if you want to get some fitness, you need to sacrifice, right? You have to sacrifice some of your time. You have to study less so that you have more time in order to get fitness, right? So what you get is point B. The fitness is higher, the grade is a little bit lower, and you're going to have more points, but this time it's not a straight line. Okay, so if you connect them, you're going to get a curvy thing, and this time when you graph it, make sure you give yourself a lot of room because we're going to write things on it. So make it large and neat. You don't need to worry about numbers. As long as it's curvy, it's good enough. This is called your PPC, so or your budget in this case, and it's called the increasing opportunity cost. So that's a concave curve. So this form of this shape is called concave, and this is more realistic. It's more realistic. If you think about it, when you study, for instance, at first, when your grade goes up from 60 to 70, it's much easier than from 90 to 100. So the more progressive it becomes progressively harder. For the fitness also, when you start doing fitness, at first you can make a lot of progress, but when you become a real professional, you need to put a lot of time in order to get a little bit of result. Okay, so this is a more realistic way of looking at production possibilities curve. All right, so let's look at the points on the PPC. So any point, including A, B, C, D, E, F, any point on the actual PPC, this is where all resources are fully employed. This is when we have maximum possible production and we're efficient. So this is kind of like the ideal. This is where you're using all of your time properly. What are the other options? There are two other options, either being outside, like point G, or inside, like point H. So let's look at G first. The points above or beyond the PPC are impossible to attain. You cannot possibly be at point G. Now you might be like, hang on, why is that? And I leave that question to you. You must be able to answer by now. You should know why the point G is not attainable, right? So write this down in your notes because it's important to know. It's just based on what we talked about. Look at the idea of resources. Points below or inside the PPC, like H, are possible, but some of the resources are idle. If you don't know this word idle, it means not working. So you might want to write it down or look it up. So that's when you have unemployment of resources, or you have inefficiency, which means all resources are being used, but not in the most productive way. In other words, point H is wasteful. So inefficient means wasteful. So we have two important concepts here, is unemployment and inefficient. You might want to highlight them. Make sure you write those two down and write some definition of your own for it. So idle is not working, not being used, sitting around, not doing anything. Another important thing here is if you're told to draw unemployment, because you might be told that later on in the course, drawing unemployment is very simple. Just draw the point H. So you draw a PPC and you put point H inside. That would be unemployment. So unemployment is not just about jobs. Unemployment here is unemployment of resources, any resource. So unemployment of time, unemployment of oil, electricity, whatever. Okay, so pause here if you need to rewatch, record the slide number, write a one-sentence summary of the slide, and then write a few points, including the definitions, and make sure you do a nice graph for yourself. So when we talk about the society, the most important resource is labor, okay? And the options that we have is to produce goods and services in general. So we can have a generic production possibilities curve with goods and services on the two axes, and the shape is going to be concave like you just saw. So from now on, whenever you're told to draw a PPC, this is what you draw, and it's going to be concave unless you're told otherwise. So unless you're given numbers, that is going to be linear. Otherwise, it's always going to be curvy, right? So we're in this case, we are choosing between goods and services. And remember, those are just different types of output. So you can have some points like A to F, like before, and that's called our PPC. And if you remember, point H inside is a point of unemployment or inefficiency. So when things are not being used fully, right? So let's look at point A and B. Suppose we're at point A. If we move from point A to point B, what's happening to our goods? Are we getting more goods or less goods? Well, our goods are increasing from A to B, but our services are decreasing. And that's called opportunity cost. You get more of something, less of something else. If you move from B to C, again, your goods go up, but services go down. Right? So there is always a trade-off between these points on the curve. But consider point H. If we move from H to B, what's going to happen? We get more services, right? The services go up. Do we lose anything? Our goods are the same. The goods at B is the same as the goods at H. So we don't lose anything. We just gain something without any loss. If we move from H to E, again, we get more goods, but no less services, so we don't have any sacrifice. And we can also move from H to C or D, where we get both services and goods without any loss, right? This is a very special case, and it's very rare, It's called free lunch. So free lunch is a special term in economics. It means making additional units of a product without less of another. This is without. So that happens when you have no opportunity cost. Okay, that means something for nothing. That would be in this case moving from point H to B, C, D, or E. All right. Now, a general principle in economics is that there is no free lunch. And the only condition for that is as long as all resources are fully employed. So I would like to emphasize this. There is no free lunch. I like this cartoon, right? You have to be suspicious. Wherever you see anywhere that says something free, like all of these bargains, watch out. Nothing is for free, even when it seems like a bargain, right? So this is a lesson for life. Be very suspicious about all of those campaigns, all of those marketing schemes, because there is really no free lunch. So pause here, record this slide number, write a one-sentence summary of this slide, draw another PPC like you see here with the arrows for point H, and take some notes. If you recall, we had a point G outside the PPC, and that was a point which is unattainable. It's just too much. So here we are dealing with generic titles, goods and services, so that's for the whole society, and we are limited by the blue line, the PPC1. So the question is it possible to reach point G? Is it possible to have more of goods and services? And the answer to that is economic growth. So this is a special term which is about the increase in the economy's production capacity. That's when we can produce more goods and services, and that's when the PPC grows outwards. So you should be able to show this graphically, and it's very simple. So the way you show it graphically is you start with something that you see right now. So that would be your initial point, and then what you do is you have to show arrows. So always in this course, whenever you have graphs and you shift something, you have to show the arrows to indicate the direction of the shift. And then you draw a new one. So in this case, you draw a new PPC, and it's going to pass through point G, and you can see that G becomes attainable, right? Now you might be like, hang on, how is that possible? How does it happen? Well, there are three main reasons for it. So there are three main causes. One of them is that if you have more resources, or if you have better resources in terms of quality, or if you have better technology. And it's important to define this properly. So more resources is about the quantity or the amount of them, like more labor, more workers, such as immigration. Better resources is about the quality of them, like productivity, and technology is about the knowledge of how to make use of our resources. Okay, so like engineering, management, formulas, designs. So pause here, write a one-sentence summary of this slide in your own words, starting first with the slide number, and then write a few points for yourself, and also do a graph showing the shift. Make sure you label everything and show the arrows. Let's summarize today's session through a concept map. If you haven't done concept maps before, they are a smart way of putting everything together. So I'm going to show you how it works. I'm going to show you one example of it, and later on in the course you're going to have to create your own version. Okay, so today we talked about resources. That was a main concept, and they are limited compared to our outputs. Okay, and because of that we must make sacrifice, right? So notice the arrows here. The arrows show sequence, and then there's a little description, which is basically a sentence that you read. Okay, and this sacrifice is called opportunity cost. If you graph this in a graph, we can represent it through the PPC. Okay, and then when the PPC shifts outward, it's because of technology, which is called growth, and that growth will enable us to achieve more output. Okay, we also had another concept called free lunch, and that is it's something that ignores the idea of sacrifice or opportunity cost, and it only happens if there is unemployment or inefficiency, and unemployment is when the resources are not used. Okay, so the one concept that I would say is most central here that you really want to get is opportunity cost, so that would be emphasized. So pause here and draw your concept map. If you like, you can draw your own version. It doesn't have to be symmetric, it doesn't have to be neat even. I have like kind of limited space here, so you have to put everything together in a square. What I would say is if you want to copy my version, that's fine, as long as you make one change. Okay, so you have to change something. Either you can change the wording of something, or you can add another concept in the lesson, or change some of the arrows. Okay, so make one change of your own, so be creative with it. You need to pause here and think a little bit. Concept maps need a little bit of thought, but they are an excellent way of putting everything together as a summary. Okay, as we reach the end of today's lesson, we're going to go back to the question that we had at the beginning. So I want you to re-answer the same questions now that you have learned the lesson. So the idea is that whether you agree or disagree may be the same, that's okay. But the three questions that follow, they should show some deepening of your understanding. So think about the examples that we looked at: the bike, the hospital, the fitness, coffee and donuts, society's labor. Think about that and how you can apply that to this question now that you have learned new material, right? If you feel undecided or uncertain, that's okay, that's fine. I mean, you're still in your learning process. When you come to show me your notes and impress me, what I care about is just to see some level of evolution of your thought, basically. Okay, so I'm not picky about that. All I want from you is your attempt. I want to see you that you're making an attempt to further your understanding. So take a minute, pause here, and think about how you would answer these questions now. I'm also going to show you a sample student answer, just to give you some ideas. But first, I ask you to pause right now and answer these questions again in your notes. So start by recording the slide number and then answer the questions. The student answer that I'm going to show you, this is what I approve of. So I think it's a fairly deep level of understanding. So it should give you a good example. So let's look at that. For the first question, the incentives could be preserving our resources and thinking that this is a free lunch. So it could be both involved here. What is being sacrificed is the production of goods and services, because companies would move to countries without restrictions, and also standard of living, that also goes down. And then the alternatives could be technological improvement or people's awareness that could cause them to change their patterns. All right. Now, if you look at these are fairly advanced, and you might be like, oh no, what's going on here? It's okay. These are answers to a test question. So by the time you get to the test, you would be at the level to answer like this, right? So if right now this seems too advanced for you, don't be discouraged. By practice, you're going to get there. You cannot copy these down yourself. If you have similar ideas, then that's fine. You can write down your own ideas in your own words, and that's how you learn, writing your own ideas in your own words, not copying. All right, have a good day.